For many, the book sealed with 7 seals in Revelation chapter 6 is one of the most difficult passages within Revelation to interpret. Several interpretative positions emerge with the purpose of debating the content of the book sealed with 7 seals. In this text, we will learn about the main interpretations of the book itself, as well as each of its 7 seals. The book sealed with 7 seals, in general, there are basically 2 interpretations of the meaning of the book in relation to the period it describes. It is important to understand this principle before discussing the opening of the seals, as the interpretation of each seal will be completely dependent on the regulatory position regarding the period for which those listed in this book are intended. But before continuing with the video, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a video and leave your like. It's very important for the channel, so let's go. Interpretation of the first seals depicted the period of the Great Tribulation. In this interpretation, the book sealed with 7 seals describes the final period of the present era, that is, a Great Tribulation. This position is generally defended by who adopts the futuristic interpretation of the book of Revelation, which is more common within the eschatological current known as classic dispensationalist premillennialism, which defends the pre-tribulationist view of the rapture of the church. Today we can say that the majority of Christians follow this eschatological line mainly due to the large number of best-selling books and film trilogies already produced that defend this position. Within this eschatological current, the interpretation of the 7 seals is very simple. The rider on the white horse is the first of the 4 horsemen mentioned in the book of Revelation, Revelation 6:22-28. But without a doubt, among all the horsemen and their horses, the rider on the white horse of the Apocalypse is the one who presents the greatest difficulty of interpretation. There are different opinions among Christians about the identity of this knight. First, it is important to understand that the rider on the white horse in the Apocalypse is a reference to the biblical text that records the opening of a book sealed with 7 seals. In fact, the rider on the white horse is equivalent to the opening of the first seal. It is also necessary to understand that the book of Revelation was written in predominantly symbolic language. So obviously the rider on the white horse of the Apocalypse is a symbol of something and should not be interpreted literally. The biblical text says that John, the author of the Apocalypse, had a vision of a white horse, and the one riding that horse had a bow. This knight also received a crown, and he emerged victorious and to conquer. Revelation 6:2. Everyone agrees that in the Bible, when mentioned figuratively, the horse generally represents strength and conquest. But on the other hand, there is no agreement among scholars about the identity of the rider who rides this white horse of the Apocalypse. There are at least 4 main interpretations of this. The rider on the white horse of the Apocalypse represents power and military conquests. In ancient times, it was common for great kings and emperors to ride a white horse to accompany their armies on a military campaign. When the battle was won, then the king was often paraded with a bow and a laurel wreath. That is why some biblical interpreters see in the rider on the white horse, who is followed by 3 other horsemen, exactly this military connection. The idea is that the rider on the white horse would be a representation of the great military campaigns that have marked history since the Roman Empire. The color white also has to do with the peace that is desired through military conquest. But the horsemen who follow the rider on the white horse of the Apocalypse show that military campaigns are always accompanied by tragic consequences, such as poverty, hunger, and death. Second seal, red horse, represents the wars that will occur in the world. The red horse with its rider represents the persecution of God's people throughout history. The church has faced harsh persecution over the centuries. From the time the book of Revelation was written, being persecuted by the Jews and the Roman Empire, to our present day, for example. Being persecuted physically in the Middle East and in several countries closed to the gospel, and morally in different parts of the world. In North Korea it is almost non-existent. It is officially an atheist state, and government policy continues to interfere with the ability of the individual. People found with Christian Bibles, considered a symbol of the West, can be executed or tortured. Refugees and defectors continue to claim that they witnessed the regime's arrests and executions of members of underground Christian churches in previous years, due to the inaccessibility of the country. According to the World Persecution List 2024, the number of Christians has increased to more than 365 million persecuted people in the world, which represents 1 in 7 worldwide. According to the analysis, based on levels of violence, the degree of government restrictions, and the amount of social hostility, the most dangerous country for Christians remains North Korea, despite a decreased level of reports of violence. Next is India, where political conflicts last year between the Meitei and Kuki ethnic groups in Manipur caused the deaths of 160 Christians and the displacement of another 60,000. In Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh, 200 Christians from 70 families were expelled from their communities. Third seal, the black horse, represents poverty, oppression, and corruption. This horse appears to be a consequence of the previous horse, although, in general, it is possible to perceive a pattern of injustice and financial difficulties acting throughout the world. Many interpreters agree that this seal applies especially to Christians who, because they are not corrupted, are prevented from buying and selling. At the time the revelation was written, Christians who did not worship the Roman emperor had their assets confiscated, in addition to being prohibited from carrying out any financial transaction. The fourth seal, the pale horse, represents death and its instruments. The biblical text says that when the Lamb opened the fourth seal, John, the writer of the book of Revelation, heard the voice of a living being saying, "Come." Revelation 6-7. Then immediately John saw a pale horse, and the rider who rode that horse was called Death. Furthermore, John further added that hell was guiding this rider and his horse, and they were given authority to kill 1/4 of men through sword, famine, pestilence, and wild beasts. Revelation 6-8. Scholars have observed that the picture presented in the appearance of the rider on the pale horse of the Apocalypse was based on an Old Testament prophecy present in the book of Ezekiel, through the prophet Ezekiel. The Lord spoke, "How much worse will it be when I send my judgments against Jerusalem, the sword, famine, wild beasts, and pestilence, to exterminate their people and their animals with them." Ezekiel 14:21. It is interesting to note that the same four sorrows are mentioned in association with the rider on the pale horse of the Apocalypse. In this sense, there are some interesting points in the biblical description of this horse and its rider. First, the color of this horse is self-identifying. Our Bible translations translate the color of this horse simply as yellow. However, in the Greek text the color indicated is a sickly color, a grayish-green-yellow color, that is, a pale color characteristic of a corpse. Second, among all the knights, the knight of the pale horse is the only one who receives a name. Going by the name Death, this knight's purpose becomes more than clear. The knight on the pale horse went out to kill. Third, the pale horse rider of the Apocalypse is closely followed by hell. The word hell translates the Greek term Hades. Although the Greek Hades has a somewhat broad meaning in the Bible, its meaning in the book of Revelation, it generally indicates the state of death, that is, the intermediate state of disembodied existence in which the saints experience heavenly comfort, while the wicked experience the terror of a place of torment. So by saying that death is accompanied by Hades, the idea is that while death strikes, Hades joins the dead. Fourth, the rider on the pale horse of the Apocalypse and his companion have predetermined limits. Here death and Hades are presented in personified form, and this emphasizes the truth that they are not uncontrollable forces who possess the authority to do whatever they want. Contrary to this, they can only do what is permitted by God's will. The fifth seal, in the seal, the scene of vision is changed. John now sees the sky. John saw the effect on earth of what is caused in heaven. Now John sees the effect in heaven of what is caused on earth. John saw an altar and the souls of the martyrs who died for their faith as a kind of sacrifice. Each of those who were sacrificed receives white robes, symbolizing justice, purity, holiness, and joy. They wait, resting from their earthly labors, until the number of martyrs is complete. When the last martyr is sacrificed, then the day of the Lord will come. It is important to understand that these souls are not unconscious, but are lucid and asking for revenge, not personal, but from divine justice. This cry of the fifth seal is the cry of the church in the face of so many massacres that it has been and still is subjected to. Sixth seal. The sixth seal shows the day, of the Lamb's wrath. It is Judgment Day, and there is no escape. Joel uses as a symbol of this day the universe being completely shaken, and men trying to hide, not from this terrifying scenario, but from the hands of the angry God. Note that they will seek physical death, but nothing will free them from the harm of the second death. Realize that all classes of people will have to stand before God's judgment. The seventh seal begins the sequence of 7 angels playing 7 trumpets. There is no chronological succession, that is, there are not 7 new events. Here, the same scene is shown, and the same story is told, but from a new perspective. Remember that the book of Revelation is organized into 7 parallel and progressive sections, which range from the first to the second coming of Christ. That is, each time the story is retold, the narrative intensifies, so that the scenes become clearer. In a very brief and direct way, the seals show the suffering of the church persecuted by the world, while the trumpets show the suffering of the world. I recognize that the book of Revelation is not one of the simplest books of the Bible to interpret, which is evident from the variety of different interpretations available. I know this ends up taking over a large number of Christians. Even among the most accomplished theologians, the book of Revelation is the subject of intense debate. Therefore, it is necessary to have a lot of respect for those who think differently. I believe that the most biblically coherent position, considering the literary style of the book of Revelation, is the second interpretation, which argues that the book sealed with 7 seals describes the period from Christ's ascension to heaven until his second coming. Therefore, the content of the chapter studied are visions that deal with the persecution of the church and God's judgment on its enemies. Particularly, I do not see any possibility of interpreting the book of Revelation as a chronological and future sequence of events, that is, as if one chapter followed the other. To interpret the apocalypse in this way is to ignore the natural organization of the apocalypse's content, and to nullify the historical context of the book. Although many people forget, the book of Revelation had as its primary recipients the 7 jewels of Asia Minor. Those brothers were being severely persecuted and were crying out for a response from God, without human conditions. They challenged the greatest empire this world has ever seen, the Roman Empire. The book of Revelation is God's answer, both to the church of the first century and to the church of all ages. Those brothers knew that victory belongs to Christ, and that they, despite so many trials, were more than conquerors. This answer is also current for us, and we must know that, together with the Lamb, we will overcome all evil attacks. If you liked this message, share it with as many people as possible. Let's spread the word of God together. May God bless you. I'll wait for you in the next video. A big hug.